WordPress Accessibility Day 2024. Ask Me Anything with WordPress Accessibility Day organizers and panelists Ricky Onsman, Technical Content Writer at TPGI, Adrienne Grace, Accessibility Analyst and Graphic Designer at The Standard, and Ricky Blacker, Senior Partner Account Manager at WP Engine. This presentation was recorded October 2024.
Welcome to WordPress Accessibility Day 2024. My name is Kelly Crowley, and I'm an accessible design consultant, a writer, and a coach. I'm also a Paralympian and a member of the disability community. We've had an unexpected change to our schedule. Our planned speaker, Tina Reese, is unavailable. So we have two members of our organizing team who have agreed to step in as panelists, and they're going to share some of their experience with us. So I'm going to start off by asking both of our panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves, share their role in WordPress and accessibility, and then I'll ask a few questions, and please join in the Q&A. You can post your questions, please, using the Q&A feature. And if you would like to connect with the other participants, you can do so in the chat feature. All right. So I guess I'll turn it over to to Ricky O. You can go ahead and get started with your intro.
Okay, so there it is. It's working. Hi everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yes, good.
Yep.
I'm actually doing the lead tech role today, but I've just been brought in, as you can see, on this emergency kind of situation, to be a panelist. Myself, and we can meet the other Ricky in a minute. I am a ex-website developer, currently working for WP Engine, and I've had a lot of experience with accessibility, mainly from doing it wrong when I first started learning how to do websites. And I've been a big, I've been very much wanting to see accessibility more mainstream in website development for a long time. But that's enough for me. I'm going to pass it over to the other Ricky.
G'day all, I'm Ricky Onsman, also based in Australia. My skill set, I guess, is an intersection of WordPress and accessibility. I'm currently the principal technical writer for TPGI, a global digital accessibility consultancy. And my job there is to write the guidance that people interpret for how to get their clients to make their websites conform to WCAG and all the other standards that apply. But in a previous life, I was a freelance web designer and developer, and I worked almost exclusively in WordPress. And that dates right back to the early days of when WordPress first came out. And at that stage, most of the web actually was quite accessible because everybody was designing according to HTML standards. It's in the years since that it's become more difficult and almost a requirement to figure out how to make websites accessible, including WordPress, of course. And that's one of the things that's happened there. I think, like a lot of WordPress designers and developers, I've had some experience in creating my own themes and plugins and trying to make them accessible along the way. So that's my background. And we've been joined by Adrienne.
Adrienne, if you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself, we're giving everyone a sense of what your background is, and yeah, if you want to go ahead.
My name is Adrienne Grace, and I am one of the WordPress Accessibility Day organizers, and I am a graphic designer and accessibility analyst, and I also do some web design and front-end web development.
Great. All right. So I guess all of us learn by doing things wrong and then figuring out how to do them right. So I'm wondering if we could go around and each of you maybe just say something like, what was one of the most impactful things that you realized early on in your accessibility journey? Oh my gosh, I've been doing this wrong. That has made a huge difference that you carry with you today. And we'll go ahead and maybe start with Ricky, who started the intros.
let me take myself off mute.
Yeah.
I got to get the coffee cup that says that. Not sure if anyone can see me. Just checking. This is. Oh, here we go. There we go. I can spotlight myself now. Yeah. Look, honestly, this is probably a really easy question to answer. This is when I first started doing web design. I had no idea about accessibility or what I was doing altogether. And I remember the first big website I'd created. I thought it was amazing. Everybody said it looked really great. And it was running for months. And then I just happened to be it was for a big online store. It was a wholesaler. I just happened to be there that day when somebody called up and they said they couldn't see any words on the site. And I looked at the website and I was going, yeah, look, I can see the words. And this person said, look, I cannot see any words on the site. It's just all black. And that's when I learned about contrast. And when you have dark blue writing or blue writing on a black background, looks amazing to me, but with somebody with color blindness, not so good. That was my first, kind of a wake-up call, I guess, on what it means for a site to be accessible. And from there on, I really had to think about everything I did to make sure that everybody had accessibility to the websites that I built. And that's one of the things that I've carried with me for a long time. And it is a huge topic, and it's something that we need to think about more. But that was the thing that started me on this journey.
For me, I would say the kind of the crunch point for me was particularly in working with WordPress was assumptions. Once I started working with WordPress, I assumed that themes and plugins would be accessible by default. And it was a bit of a shock to me to realize that actually people didn't pay that much attention to accessibility at all, and that most of the themes were worse than some static websites in terms of their accessibility. I now use, I still use themes, and I actually prefer some of the free themes that are around because they are a bit like a blank canvas that I can work with. So I can impose my design and functionality on a site using a theme like Astra. I used to use Canvas a lot. And that's been kind of what has made WordPress design work for me in terms of accessibility, finding themes and plugins that will allow me to add accessibility. And that was a real turning point for me when I realized not only could I do that, but I would have to do that if I wanted my websites to be accessible.
Yeah, a really important lesson that accessibility doesn't happen by accident, right? It's intentional. Adrienne, what's one of your first lessons in your accessibility journey that you still carry with you today? I'm sure there's a lot, but maybe one of the most.
Yeah, actually, because I originally started out as a graphic designer and got into web design. So, and I knew about alt text and that, although I admit that I look back and think what I wrote, now that I know more, was not acceptable. But once somebody mentioned color contrast, and I started doing some research about it, and I had been given actually designs by somebody else, and I had to go to them and say, hey, look, I think this is a problem. This is not going to meet color contrast at all. And as many of you know, if you're on a phone, you're in a bright light, you really can't see. And so that was once I started hearing about, hey, there's these other things other than just alt text. I honestly thought that's all it was. And I now, like everybody, the more you know, the more you look back and think, how could I not have known? And you just want to go and continue your journey to make it better. So I'm sure in a year I'll look back and still say the same thing. Look what I didn't know.
Right. Hopefully we're all on a learning journey here. Definitely. I know I am. So here's a question. I'm not sure who would be the best to answer it. So I'll just let one of you jump in and sort of take the lead on this. How do you assess WordPress plugins or themes for accessibility to know if they provide a good starting point or won't add a lot of issues to your site?
Sorry, could you just say that again? I didn't quite catch it.
Yeah, the question is, how do you assess WordPress plugins or themes for accessibility to know if they provide a good starting point or won't add accessibility issues to your site?
Right. I don't have a sophisticated answer for this. I'm afraid what I do is I try it and try a plugin, and then I run my accessibility tests, and then I discover that it's creating all kinds of problems. So I'll get rid of that one and try another one. That's about as sophisticated as my methodology gets.
I know that if I find a theme that has an example site, I will run some tests on the example site first. You know, sometimes they'll have a demo, and that's a really good way to kind of poke around a little bit without having to make the investment of actually importing it and trying to set it up and everything with your client's content. So maybe that's cheating.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's am I mute? No,
We can
no,
hear
it's
you.
okay. It's just double checking.
You're
I'm just
good.
so used to being on mute. Yeah, look, for me, and one of the things I found when I first started doing website design was I was always looking for different themes to fit the project or the client that I was working on. And what I found when I was doing that is I'd end up with a whole heap of themes that were all different in the way you had to interact with them and do things with them, and it got confusing, especially if you had a site that you didn't have to touch for quite a long time. So I got into the habit of picking one or two themes. Generally, you want one theme that you get to know really well. So choosing the right theme, obviously something very lightweight, very easy to make look the way you want it to look, but also have as much pro accessibility features built in right from the very start. Learn that deeply. Use CSS and code to change the appearance of that theme as much as you can, and make it fit the clients or the project or whatever you're doing within the web space. If you're just one person doing one website for your business, that's not as important. But if you're an agency or a developer where you're working with multiple clients all the time, finding the right one, sticking to it until obviously something better maybe down the track comes along. But I found just finding one good theme, making sure it's worked correctly, lightweight, stick with it, get to know it really well, because the more you get to know one theme, the better you'll be at it, and the more and plus you can build in a lot of this accessibility features that you need and replicate that across multiple sites as you build out for customers.
Yeah. All right, so we have a question in the Q&A. It says, is there input on accessibility for default theme or patterns for WordPress? Specifically, the color combos seem to not be tested / don't pass accessibility. I'm not sure what to make of that, to be honest. So I'm not sure who to direct the question to. So if one of you has a good answer or a lead on it, I think the question is related. Go ahead.
Is it about the design? I'm trying to read the question again so that we're answering correctly.
So we're talking about the default themes like WordPress 2021, 2022, that sort of stuff. Yeah, look, I find them incredibly disappointing. And they don't seem to get better. I find it amazing that a default theme can be offered that is often increasingly less accessible year by year. And they have funky little things thrown in that I guess fit in with current trends, but they don't advance or enhance accessibility as far as I can see. And I very rarely do more than glance at a default theme these days. I just look for something that works better almost from the start.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is surprising to see some of the color themes that are built in. Some of them, I do think that the 2024 theme, they did work very hard to make some accessible color themes in there. So but part of that is also knowing how to combine those colors. You can still take a dark color, and if you pair it with a dark color, and you need that color, that grid that you can create so that you know what you can use and what combos you can use together. And is it Does it need to be that 4.5 to 1, or is it a UX element where maybe it could be 3 to 1? So I
Adrienne,
think
would
that
you
that's also, I'm sorry, say that again?
go ahead? I was going to say, would you be willing to say more about your process for evaluating your color palette and deciding what how you are going to make it work?
I actually, when I can, I sit down with the client's color palette and I do that, what is it, the 8 contrast grid, the 8 shapes contrast grid, because I want to know and I want to be able to point to something when we start building out a design, or when we do a mock-up, when we do a wireframe, and say, this is what we can do and this is what we can't, because they may say, well, I really like, the dark purple and the dark blue, and that's great, but not if you're going to use one on top of the other, or you need to be able to tell something, one from the other. I can't use those two next to each other in a pie chart either. They would just blend together. So there's a little bit about that planning. I know in many cases over the course of this, Zoom webinars today, we've talked about how you can really avoid so many problems by starting with the design and starting from the beginning, thinking about accessibility. And color is just one of those ways. And it is working with that client and educating them about, hey, this is why we need to think about this from the beginning, rather than tease them with something that they approve and then you say, no, oh, now that we're testing it, now we can't do that.
Yeah, saves
Yeah,
resources.
I think there are some very good tools out there too that allow you to start with a very basic color combination, and that can, A, tell you whether that is an accessible color combination or not, and then B, can it help you adjust those color combinations so that they are accessible. And it's great to see that there are more and more tools like that out there, and that extends right to the gamut of a design system. And there are design systems there now that you can inject a color combination into, and it'll draw the whole design system for you along with an accessible color combination. So it's it's horses for courses. You've got to look at for the people who create the tools that you can use to make that part of your job easier.
Yeah, there's a suggestion in the chat about putting smiley faces and frowny faces alongside the grid. A color contrast chart for a quick glance.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's clever.
A follow-up question on color is there a best practice color scheme that works across most use cases?
Oh, other than like black and white, that doesn't, but even that, then for some people, that's too harsh. No, I really don't think that you should feel limited in color. I know Pauline Grotzer always says there is no such thing as an inaccessible color. There's only inaccessible color combinations. You're not going to use all pastels next to each other. You're not going to use all the darks next to each other. You can absolutely use any of those colors. You just need to be careful about how you're pairing them, what your foreground and background colors are, and just make those choices from there. So don't feel limited. And if you want to develop for yourself a default palette that works for you, that you can mock up something very quickly to show a client, absolutely build something like that. I know you can save it in any way you want. I know you can, gosh, I think you can put it into the, I'm forgetting my back end terms, but anyway, you can create your theme file basically and drop it in if that's what you really want to do.
One of the talks earlier today talked about logos and color combinations. And personally, I quite enjoy that challenge of getting a client who has a set of colors that they want to use as their brand, and then finding a way to make those color combinations work in an accessible way. Often it's a fight, and you have to kind of really put up arguments to say, well, what's worth more to you, your brand color or making your website accessible to as many possible potential customers as possible? But it's a good challenge because in almost all cases it can be done. It's just a matter of how you do it.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges I faced was when you want to put text with an image background and how to do that successfully. That's always because putting, words on a solid background is very easy to get the contrast right. But when you've got that time when you want to have a nice mountain scenery background picture, but you want to put some words over the top, and finding ways to make it look amazing and stand out so you can read the words. That was one of the things that I always struggled with. And sometimes you had to kind of make sacrifices in what you wanted to look like to what was actually accessible for people to read.
Okay.
In the chat, Meg Miller says, I love creating palettes using the Tailwind Ink HCL generator. I was just about to type, that is beyond my skill set, but it sounds like a very cool tool.
All right. Let's talk curb cuts. So, in the physical world, we think about curb cuts as, they're an accessibility feature, but that benefit everyone. And so what are maybe we could go around and everyone maybe mention one or two of your what you think of as digital curb cuts, things that we do for accessibility that are actually just making the web a better place.
Well, I'll speak up in favor of captions. Captions on videos, absolute godsend to so many people. And it's a simple thing. I mean, in Australia, it kind of started with a television broadcast called SBS that was designed as a multicultural broadcaster. So they were showing a lot of foreign language films and TV series. And they got very, very low viewership until they started putting subtitles and then captions on their movies and TV series. And then suddenly they became one of the major broadcasters in Australia. And that I think in our country, at least, that was a big kind of trendsetter, and people realized there are a lot of people watching these movies who don't even speak the language that the movie is in, but they enjoy watching the movie. And that just extends to people who can't hear the dialogue at all. And I think I have a hearing impairment myself. I have captions on for everything I watch. And it is an absolute godsend.
I live with somebody that has some hearing loss, and it's very normal to me. So, and I would say it's also a godsend, because otherwise it would be so loud, it would be very uncomfortable for me.
Of course.
And I also realize how much more you retain. So, and it's really easy switch to go to foreign films. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things, I think that's a huge one. Something that doesn't, you don't see it really, but it's huge for SEO is that heading hierarchy. Having to do that. And I explained that to somebody as, look, I can add this to your website, but I need to know your headings. And she came back to me later. She grumbled about it at the time. And then she came back and she said, I'm really glad that you made me do that. I said, you got to think of this as an outline, and she said, it forced me to sit down and think about this. And I have a much better webpage now. And I'm really happy with it. And I showed it to somebody, and they want to include this as a chapter in their book. So I was happy to see that it actually made a difference for her, that she saw that was immediate, other than me just being difficult.
I think one of the big things for me, that big site I told you about, that the first one I ever created and got paid for, one of the things I had to do with that was to import 7,000 products into the website manually. And it was all beauty products. And I got very good at adding images. And one of the great things about WordPress is you can add in description, all the alt text and all the descriptions to make the images, accessible and all that. But one of the things that I found when I was doing that, it's a little bit of a trick that I learned, which makes not only the images accessible and the website look great and for screen readers, But a little trick to make it accessible as a developer or a website owner. You know, when you get a website with like thousands of images, you've been running the website for years and you've been uploading images, and you think, I had an image about 3 years ago and I can't remember what it was called, because a lot of times what we do is we upload the image as it is, and a lot of times images come in with weird like DSC 74900 kind of file names, and we just upload that and then we do all our alt text and we're happy with that. But what I found was I was actually, before I was uploading it to WordPress, I was renaming the image with a description of what the image was as the file name, because in a couple of years' time, you could go back and instead of trying to find some random image through thousands of images, you could just do a search for, you know, what the description of the type or what you're looking for, and more likely to find it. And it actually, I don't know if it has any SEO benefits at all, having a file name describing the image, but I figured it couldn't hurt either. So, but that was just a little thing that I was doing. And it's one of the great things about WordPress is, you know, that ability to easily tag out images when needed. But yeah, just think about when you're uploading them, changing the actual file name makes it easier down the track.
Right, before our next question, I'll go ahead and just remind our audience that if you have any additional questions, go ahead and pop them in the Q&A feature. So one of the sort of perennial topics is end user experience, right? The ideal situation is that our end users are part of the design process from the very beginning. And I'm wondering if the three of you have suggestions for how companies can get that end user feedback that they need, knowing that maybe they may or may not have those employees actually working for them. I don't know, Adrienne, do you want to maybe start this one?
I
Spot.
think it's an excellent question, and I would say it's a I've found it a hard sell, but you know, the larger the company, the more invested they are in making sure that they achieve legal compliance and that they really are reaching large audiences. And one way to explain it to them is, hey, we need to hire a firm that will have, you know, testers that have various disabilities, and we want somebody that's a native screen reader user. Even people that are sighted, we can learn to use them, but that doesn't make us a native user, and we're not going to use it the same way. And I know that's something Amber Hines talks about a lot, is that some of the people that she tests with laugh with her about, hey, you know, nobody really reads it the way you're using it. So it's really is important to understand, you know, you can do things certainly with a keyboard for yourself, and those kinds of things, but you can also run all of the tests of, hey, you can probably find somebody that's colorblind in your company, but you can use a lot of those simulators, then that can help, but definitely using somebody that really has that disability is always going to be the best.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think if web clients have a budget for it, then that's one of the things that they should put some money towards, is to doing testing with real users. Mind you, having said that, for my smaller clients, from a cheese shop to a refrigeration vendor, I'll call on friends. And what I do find is that one small breakthrough can lead to a lot more. So getting one friend who's blind to sit there and use somebody's website, and in front of their web developers and designers and content authors and project managers, they are stunned every time at how inaccessible their websites are. And when they see somebody actually trying to buy a product of theirs online, it has such an impact on them that it often leads to, when you say, right, now we've got to test with other people, and they go, look, test with whoever you need to. This has been such a revelation to us. So getting that first breakthrough of showing it, and often for me, it is having a blind person trying to buy a product online. And it is such a makes such a breakthrough for them that it has a very positive effect for pretty much everything else you say.
Yeah, and I agree with all that. And I think also too, one of the things that I like to make people aware of is, while making websites accessible for people with disabilities is probably one of the most important things we do, but when we talk about accessibility, we mean accessibility for absolutely everyone. And sometimes, you know, websites are inaccessible to people without disabilities because of the way that they've been designed, or other factors. I know I've had issues with sites. You know, sometimes you get on the site and it's really frustrating, and you just don't want to go forward anymore. And I think, you know, sometimes that obviously it gets surfaced when people with disabilities are testing websites. But I think it's one of the things we have to, apart from, is it, you know, are we ticking all the boxes for people with disabilities, but are we ticking all the boxes for people just to access the website in a normal way? Having people just trying to, I had an issue with there was a home show just last year, I think it was, and they had it in Australia, in Brisbane, and they had an email form to get tickets, and I could never get tickets. They never sent me the tickets, and I tried it, and finally I found out the reason why was in the email form. It said, you know, how many people to, and I filled out my details and I hit submit, and you would expect that would be it. You've submitted your details, it's all done. But no, it actually, because it refreshed the form, you're used to that behavior, refreshing the form. What I didn't notice was a little thing at the top that said enter in second person's details, because I was taking my wife. And until I entered two people's details, it wasn't submitting the form completely, and I wasn't getting my tickets. And that's, as we know in accessibility, that's expected behavior. You expect, when you hit submit, you've submitted, and unless there's a big warning to say, please submit more information, you think you're done. And I think that's, you know, when we're talking about accessibility and testing, it's a small thing. It probably ticked all the boxes as far as people being able to see the form, but I wasn't able to complete the form, which was really interesting.
That's right.
That's a good point.
All right. We have a question here in our Q&A that I'll just go ahead and read. I'm assuming you've all dealt with people who absolutely refuse to accept accessibility as a necessity. Do you find yourself continuing to deal with these people in a gentle manner, or do you find yourself leaning into more harsh, no-nonsense approaches, or maybe both? Who wants to start that one?
I'll go first on that one. I'm old and grumpy, and I'm just sick of taking that nonsense, you know, and I'm now at the point where I kind of go, I'll give a little bit of leeway, but look, if you do not want to make your website accessible, then I am not the designer or front-end developer for you. Take it or leave it.
I know I work in a company where it is a legal requirement and that's recognized. But you know, some people are absolutely like, this is amazing. I can't believe I didn't know about this before. And I know for others, I know it can be, it can feel like just another huge task, and it feels more onerous because they don't necessarily understand it or know a lot about it. So I think it feels weightier than if they knew about it and it was just sort of felt like common knowledge. So I think that that's part of it. But I think you do have to, yes, it can be very frustrating at times, but I think recognizing that maybe they haven't made that correlation of, hey, a senior in their family that, you know, maybe has Parkinson's and, you know, has a shaky hand and it's difficult to use a mouse or a trackpad, that it could be somebody that they know. It doesn't just have to be the, you know, extremes of somebody who absolutely has no vision or is using a, you know, sip and puff, something like that. They think in the extremes, and that feels very difficult. And you just kind of have to little bit at a time, a little bit at a time.
Yeah, I think it's, for a lot of people, it's daunting. And unless you build in accessibility right from the very beginning, if you already have a website and it's not accessible, it can be very daunting. It can be costly, it can be time consuming to do that. And we really do have to think about building it in from the very beginning. But I think, when you're trying to make people see why, I think, like I always refer back to, like, do analogies of brick and mortar stores and things like that, because it's more relatable. Digital seems sort of unrelatable for some people. But I mean, if you had a brick and mortar store, you want to make that as accessible to people, especially if you've got an online store, you're trying to get people to whatever you're doing with your website. You've got to make it as accessible as possible. And if you don't, people, just don't go there. That's the big thing with the web, is that there's usually 100 sites doing the same thing. And people will go to the fastest, most accessible site they can find, and they'll vote with their feet as they walk away to another website. So, and people don't know what business they're losing. We can measure how much business we're getting, but we don't know the ones that are walking past because there's problems. So I guess it's just making them aware that these things are important, not just for, for ticking a box, but for the health of your website, to get through whatever. I mean, unless it's just a cat blog and you don't really care if anybody sees it or not, and I'm not making bad things about cat blogs. I love cats. I think, if you've got a purpose to your website, if you need to get customers or people to your website for a reason, don't make it hard for them. Make it as easy as possible, and that is worth the time and the effort and the money to do that.
I will add that in my job these days, I do less of the direct designing and front-end development myself, but I work with clients who have quite large teams of designers and developers who know that they have to. There is a requirement, a legal requirement, that they've got to make their websites accessible. But they come back with, well, we can't do it. It can't be done. And that is like, that's fodder for me. Yes, it can, and I'll show you how. And it's often when you get technical with them, they go, "Oh, right, I didn't know we could do that." So it's often a very technical exercise. I don't meet so much resistance these days from our clients, because they know they're working for a large corporation and they know it's a legal requirement. Their bosses have said it has to be accessible. Their problem is, how do they do it? And they don't have the skills to do it. A lot of them, because they haven't really learned basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So, they're surprised to find that it can be done, that, and a lot of, I might add that, a lot of the stuff that we work with, like React frameworks, no, accessibility is not built in, but it also isn't obstructed. You have to know how to inject accessibility into a React framework. And once you get that technical, yeah, it can be done. Of course it can be done.
All right, we have time for, we have one quick question, I believe, in the chat or in the Q&A, and then I have one final question for everyone here. So the question in the Q&A is, what's your go-to for a good starter theme for a good baseline? And
I've already said I'm a fan of Astra. I see a lot of comments on the accessibility Slack channels that no, Astra is not accessible, and that is true. But Astra is very good. It can be made accessible, But basically, like I would say, any theme that has a customization facility in it that stores your customization in a separate style sheet is a good place to start. If it doesn't have that, avoid it. And you want it to be stored separately so that when the theme is upgraded, that it doesn't throw away all your customization. But, something that gives you the opportunity to customize it, to add CSS, to add styling and functionality that is accessible, that's the way to go. For me, that's Astra. I love it.
For me, it's the Frost theme. It's, once again, it's not so much how accessible it is, it's how accessible you can make it. And Frost theme is just a very simple, basic theme. It uses the full site editing that we're starting to see come into WordPress themes now, where you can edit the header and the footer, and you don't you can kind of do all the things you need to do with it. But that's just my go-to one at the moment.
I saw somebody mentioned Cadence, which I've heard good things about. I have not used it personally, but again, several people have said that, and I would agree with what both Rickies have said, which is that it it really is about starting with something that's maybe clean enough that you can go in and make it accessible.
Right. And then we have, I had a really silly question for all of you, but we have an actual practical question that's come in here on the Q&A. Do any of you use insight surveys to collect info from your audience on your website? And is it recommended or not?
I'm not sure. You mean like a survey of your users, your user base, emailing them a survey? I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
If there's if you want to provide clarification on your question in the chat, we can.
Yeah, I want to make sure we're answering this appropriately.
Do any of you use insight surveys to collect info from your audience on your website ease of use? Oh,
okay.
Whether or not your website was navigable. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. In design phase, you want to do some user testing. You can start even with basics in wireframes, even. And then, of course, yes, is part of your final testing, because you want to make sure that you don't have a big oops.
Yeah, I tend to, both on my own site and the sites that I build, I have an accessibility statement, and that is, it makes a claim for saying that, we try to make this website conformant to a minimum of WCAG 2.2 level AA. If you find anything that doesn't conform to those standards, or if you have difficulty accessing any part of this website, then take this action, whether that's, filling in a form or just sending us an email or whatever. I don't generally survey people in the sense of, here's a form for you to fill in about what you did and didn't like or couldn't use about it, but I leave it up to individual people to speak up about what did and didn't work for them.
And my answer is going to be very quick. I actually haven't designed a website for a long time, but if I did in the future, I would definitely add a feature like that to get the feedback. I think it's very important.
All right. Well, with that, we're pretty much out of time. If there are questions in the Q&A that still need to be addressed, we can address those. We can continue them in the chat. And I want to thank everyone here, Adrienne, Ricky, and Ricky, for jumping in at the last minute and being on our panel. We really appreciate your insight and your expertise. Just a reminder for all of our attendees, you can continue the conversation in the chat right now or on social media using hashtag WPA11YDay and hashtag WPAD2024. We also appreciate it if you go to 2024.wpaccessibility.day/feedback to provide anonymous feedback for our speakers on their presentations. You can enter to win a t-shirt while you're there. And stay tuned for Same Editor, Same Language, How Gutenberg's Accessibility Enhances Creativity and Inclusion, coming up next at 6 o'clock UTC. While you're waiting for that to start, don't forget to visit our sponsors pages to grab virtual swag and enter for a chance to win great prizes. We'll see you right here after the break. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you to WordPress Accessibility Day 2024 sponsors. Platinum sponsor 20i. Easily build, deploy, and manage all your projects with 20i managed WordPress hosting. One UI for all your servers, apps, sites, databases, security, DNS, and email. Perfect for agencies, e-commerce, developers, multi-site hosting, and high-traffic sites. Platinum sponsor Equalize Digital. Since all they do is accessibility, every post on their blog is an accessibility resource. You can find webinar recordings, articles, and additional resources at equalizedigital.com/resources. Platinum sponsor, WP Engine. WP Engine provides the most relied upon and trusted WordPress products for businesses, brands, and agencies of all sizes. Thanks to our gold sponsors, GoDaddy, Grackle Docs, Gravity Forms, Green Geeks, TPGI, and Yoast. And thank you to our silver sponsors, CodeGeek, Drake Cooper, Elementor, Overnight Website, Pressable, Second Melody, and Accessibility Collective.